The solution strategies are all about reducing the need for expensive new power stations and extra grid capacity and using what we already have. An electric vehicle is basically an energy storage unit on wheels. I welcome you to the fourth episode of this podcast. My name is Teresa, I'm an economist, and I love to talk about electric vehicles. Have you ever asked yourself whether our electricity system can actually resist the rising number of electric vehicles? Well, I have, and I in fact find it very reasonable to fear sudden electricity shortages, or maybe even a total crash of the grid if we underestimate the burden that comes along with electric vehicle charging. But how severe is the situation really, and what are the best strategies to prevent our system from an overload? In this episode, we will try to find answers to these questions. The share of electric vehicles in the US is currently 0.6% of all cars, and given the fact that the current number of EVs is so low, it actually hardly affects the electricity system at all, at the moment at least. But what if the current number of electric vehicles increases? In that sense, let's have a look at different scenarios. It seems like the key concern is not the overall increase in the total demand for electricity, but rather the pattern of usage. Because there are times of the day where our current electricity system is not operating at full capacity, and on the other hand, there are some peak hours at which more people use electricity at the same time. And now, of course, different areas in the world have a different degree of this volatility. In areas with strong differences in seasonal weather, the electricity requirement fluctuates more than in areas with, for example, more consistent or stable weather. And hence, some areas have an enormous excess energy capacity already at these times of the day or of the week or of the year where no one uses electricity. And other areas with a more consistent need for electricity, they most likely already operate closer to the limits at all times, and therefore they are already using the capacity that they have in a very efficient way. But what does this have to do again with electric vehicles? Well, the more you adjust the electric vehicle charging patterns to the current system fluctuations, hence the more you seize the excess capacity, the more electric vehicles are bearable by an existing electricity grid. And we therefore from now on distinguish between the scenario of uncoordinated charging patterns as they are right now and efficient, moderated charging patterns. Let's focus on the scenario of completely uncoordinated charging patterns first, as they are right now. In the most cases, electric vehicle owners will start charging their car in the early evening hours when they come home so that it can charge throughout the night and is ready for usage in the morning. And aside from charging at home, it is also common to charge the car at public, high-voltage, quick charger stations, usually during errands throughout the day. Or they could also charge it at their workplace. These are the most likely or the most common charging patterns. And assuming that the charging patterns stay as uncoordinated as they are right now, a model by Muratori predicts that problems at peak hours could arise even if the electric vehicle share is very small, especially in neighborhoods with high electric vehicle adoption, exacerbating the local level. Especially suburban areas are most likely to become early electric vehicle adoption hotspots, and they are therefore prone to a system overload. These so-called clustering effects become even more severe with the implementation of these high-power charging stations at home. It is quick and convenient, on the one hand, but then on the other hand, a massive burden for the electricity grid. A single fast charging station can quickly exceed the peak load capacity of a typical feeder circuit transformer. This is already the case even though the aggregate electricity demand might not necessarily increase that much. In numbers speaking, Muratori calculates that an increase of the electric vehicle share in the US from currently 0.6% up to 3% does not significantly affect the overall energy consumption at all, not even when considering these high-power charging stations, but however, it has a significant effect on the shape of the aggregate demand, making the peak demand even higher and even more abrupt than it already is. An increase of the electric vehicle share up to 10% again would cause the aggregate energy demand to increase by only approximately 5%. So there's not a big impact on the overall demand. The crucial burden is rather the increasing fluctuations in demand. Muratori's findings coincide with the predictions of the consulting agency McKinsey. They are rather confident that with the right measurements, electric vehicles will not create a crisis for the electricity system in Germany at least. And similar statements I found also about the electricity system in Britain and about the electricity system in the US. McKinsey estimates that electric vehicles will cause the overall electricity demand to increase by only 1% until 2030 and 5% until 2050. These increases can be handled by the current system if the charging patterns are coordinated wisely, but if not, then upgrades and investments are definitely necessary. Should we, however, stick to our uncoordinated charging pattern, the peak hours of electricity demand could dramatically increase. In numbers speaking again, the maximum peak could rise by up to 30% in the case of a local vehicle share of 25%. This is indeed a big problem. So now that we know how severe the situation is, it is time to talk about the coping strategies. Are coordinated charging patterns even realistic? I will introduce you to a couple of methods that could help us to use the current electricity system as efficient as possible in regard to the rising number of electric vehicles. The solution strategies are all about reducing the need for expensive new power stations and extra grid capacity and using what we already have in the most efficient way. The first approach, we could try to influence the consumer's charging behavior by time of use electricity tariffs. Charging at off-peak hours would then be substantially cheaper, and people would have an incentive to, for example, set an automatic timer such that the vehicle might be plugged in already at 6 but effectively starts charging only after midnight. And since there's evidence that electric vehicles are actively charging only 20% of the time that they are connected to the grid when they are charged at home and only 75% for public charging stations, I see a lot of potential in that method to shift this charging burden. And of course, such an electricity timer might has to be introduced to the market first, but I don't see why this shouldn't be possible. And of course, one should keep in mind that this could result again in little timer peaks, so one would have to find a smart solution for that as well. But there's a study that shows that in the UK, at least 60% more electric vehicles could be charged from the existing grid when implementing this type of flexible charging. Another highly relevant strategy is the smart use of energy storage. Now that batteries are becoming cheaper, more efficient, and less damaging for the environment, we should finally start to implement larger energy storage units in addition to the regular system. Energy providers could, for example, install local storage units with a transformer that charges it during the times of low demand and discharges at times of peak demand, and this practice could balance out the fluctuations and smooth these load profiles. Let's talk about the fast charging stations for a minute, as they pose a particular burden to the electricity grid as they demand high voltage in very irregular frequencies. And for that matter, McKinsey finds that despite these high fluctuations, there is still some kind of regularity in the charging pattern. Charging at public fast charging stations seems to follow somewhat a weekday and weekend rhythm. Talking about efficiency and intelligent monitoring of electricity is also the time to get a bit creative and innovative. So why not installing more combined heat and power plants? This could be useful, for example, to charge a fleet of delivery vans while also heating the warehouse at the same time. Another very smart proposal is more solar panels on private rooftops combined with a home energy storage unit. As we have talked about in the last episode about recycling and reusing batteries, this is a great usage for old electric vehicle batteries. The combination of charging timers and storage units could also be beneficial from an environmental perspective by demanding energy at times of excess solar and wind generation and using stored energy in times of low renewable production. This would make the energy system more sustainable. I consider storage units as a very valuable balancing asset, and I really hope that great energy providers start thinking about it too. Speaking of creative solutions, I can't believe that we have not talked about smart charging and vehicle-to-grid solutions so far. It sounds fancy, and I find it in fact very fancy. Vehicle-to-grid, what is this? It means that the battery capacity on board of the vehicle can be used for something else than just driving. An electric vehicle is basically an energy storage unit on wheels. Vehicle-to-grid, or V2G, allows the stored electricity from the electric vehicle to be sent back onto the grid when it is needed. This will free up some existing grid capacity. On the downside though, frequent charging and discharging has a negative impact on the battery lifespan, as we all know. So the vehicle can feed energy back into the grid under certain conditions. Maybe not only to the grid, but also to other electric vehicle users on public areas. If an electric vehicle owner knows that she will not use all of her energy in the car that is parked on the street, she can offer this excess energy via an app on her phone to people who desperately need energy and maybe charge a higher price than she paid for the energy in the first place, leaving her with a bit of a profit margin. Her car, therefore, worked as a mobile charging station. Isn't that smart? Of course, a lot of details still have to be worked out, but it is a smart and innovative solution strategy. Some car manufacturers are already working on it, and pilot studies have already shown a substantial willingness of electric vehicle owners to participate in coordinated smart charging. Even if all of these strategies are implemented, upgrades and investments are probably inevitable. Expanding the overall capacity will hopefully include investments in renewable energy sources rather than fossil fuels. And furthermore, investments in the electricity distribution infrastructure are necessary, especially when using higher voltage in home power charging. McKinsey estimates that the need for investments might be relatively low at first, but then can jump up rapidly after a certain threshold of electric vehicle adoption, and eventually / hopefully decrease again once the upfront investments are installed and the electric mobility system is sufficiently implemented. After all, the implementation of electric mobility is a challenge for our electricity system, but not necessarily from an overall capacity perspective, but rather from an efficient usage pattern perspective, requiring smart consumer monitoring and innovative solutions. Therefore, one could also see the new challenges as a welcome growth opportunity for electric utilities. We have reached the end of the episode. I hope I could not only inform you but further inspire you and get excited about innovation and smart technology. If you want to reach out to me, please don't hesitate. My contact information is in the show notes, and also check out my new website, electricvehiclepodcast.com. Enjoy the Easter holiday, and let's have a talk about electric vehicles again soon. Bye!